Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I'm with my fellow theurgists, and we'll be discussing THEURGIA. The topic for the day is nostalgia. Nostalgia means many things to many people, and we're going to explore what it means to us and how it influences or affects our theurgic practice. I have with me Tony Mierzwicki, who is a scholar and very well read and very much written. And he's been involved in a lot of really interesting projects that we'll get a chance to hear about. And Clio Ajana, who's very mysterious and uses various names in her various spheres of activity. I did that for many years as well, so I can appreciate that. Welcome, O theurgists.
Hi, Hercules. It's good to be here.
Who would like to start? Claire, would you like to start and start talking about nostalgia?
I want to hear from Tony, but
Okay,
Okay,
Tony, would you like to start?
yeah, I'm happy to start. The way this
Your
topic
your
came,
volume went down. It just went down.
what about now? Is that better?
Now it's lower.
first.
Worse. Okay, how about now?
Much better.
Okay. I'll just move the microphone a little bit closer to myself. Okay, so the way this topic came about was that Brandy, who unfortunately can't be here, came across an article in the online Greek reporter, e-zine, called Nostalgia, one of ancient Greece's enduring concepts, which was uploaded on January 31st, 2025. And it was written by a guy called Thanos Batanis. It's an excellent read, and I would recommend it to anyone. And what I was going to do was have a look at bits and pieces of the article. So there's right off the bat, there was one bit that stood out to me. He wrote, nostalgia has become a defining trait for millennials and Gen Zers. In recent years, adult toy sales have surged, and the creation of adult coloring books has followed suit. So coloring books aren't the first things that pop into my mind when I think of adult toys. Hey, got to get my mind out of the gutter. The author is actually talking about recapturing your childhood, that state of playful innocence. And I personally believe that when we lose access to our inner child, then we start to age. This, of course, presupposes that you had a nice childhood, mostly free of trauma. So the word nostalgia originates from the Greek words nostos, which means return home, and algos, which means pain. So nostalgia depends on remembering a place, whether physical or emotional. So let's have a look at the first condition where you remember a physical place. So that manifests as homesickness. So there were a number of Greek myths that deal with homesickness. Probably the most famous one is Homer's Odyssey, where we have the hero Odysseus struggling to return back, and it deals with his adventures. And also worthy of mention is the story of Jason and the Argonauts. The ancient Greeks were a seafaring culture, setting up colonies everywhere, and so they're often separated from their homeland. So homesickness was an inescapable part of life. The Greeks were also very conservative. Religious rituals were performed as their ancestors had done them, and only permission from an oracle would allow them to change things. And they would also see the deities of foreign nations in terms of their own. So to give a few examples, Set became Typhon, Ammon was Zeus, Osiris was Dionysus, Ptah was Hephaestus. Everything that was Greek had a sacredness to it. So the second form of nostalgia is remembering an emotional state. So for instance, if you were in a warm, loving relationship and then you become single, so that can also apply to having had a close-knit family and losing them all. So public holidays like Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving become very lonely and a painful reminder of what has been lost. Of course, this does not apply to unhappy relationships. What I want to focus on is a third condition where you remember a heightened spirituality, an experience or an understanding of the divine that can lead to dissatisfaction with mainstream religions. So personally, I grew up Catholic, and my experience as a Catholic child was going to confession, going to mass, putting money in the collection plate, having Holy Communion. And to be honest, it was an empty experience. And it appears to be just as empty for many others who have left. Then there's also the nasty side of Roman Catholicism. There's homophobia, xenophobia, misogyny, molestation of children and nuns. Now, many people in mainstream churches also feel like outsiders. They have a feeling of being different, not fitting in with others in mainstream churches. So to quote the late, great Robin Williams, he said something that was incredibly profound. He said, "I used to think that the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel all alone." And I can't help but wonder how many people sit in churches and attend church social functions feeling like they don't belong there. And when these people get into paganism, witchcraft, or some other alternative spiritual modality, they often report a feeling of coming home or finding family or finding their tribe. So how do we explain this warm, fuzzy feeling? It could be a past life memory. It could also be a trigger for a very pleasant memory of, for example, being out in nature. Either way, it satisfies a deep-seated longing for something real. Mundane life has its highs and lows. The highs are fantastic, but inevitably the lows follow, leading to feelings of powerlessness, frustration, and anger. Tapping into spirit leads to a constant state of inner peace, contentment, joy, and satisfaction that arises from a deep connection with the divine. There is also a feeling of empowerment and of being in control. In ceremonial magic, connection to the divine normally happens through the intercession of the holy guardian angel or the higher self. So the same feelings of longing are used to access this entity. And the jury's still out on whether this entity is something external that's assigned to us at birth or whether it is within us, our higher self. So those are basically my feelings on nostalgia.
That's very profound, and thank you. That was an excellent introduction as well. I'm going to react to it a little bit before I pass it down to Clio. Um, I am Greek by birth and nurturance, and so even keeping some of the Greek customs I've kept keeps me in the Greek frame of mind. Like every square inch of flat space in our house is an altar of some sort to somebody. And Athena is also an ascriber to mythic spiritualities. So we have not only the Greek gods, but the Celtic ones, the Norse ones, a bunch of other ones we picked up in our travels. So the house is an altar. We have a labyrinth in our backyard, thanks to my wife's making a labyrinth. So we're immersed in this. And I found that I didn't resonate very much with Greek Orthodox Christianity. In fact, I had a lot of problems with priests when I was growing up. But I resonated with the tales of Olympus. And when I rebelled against my culture and explored other things, I did. I explored everything from the Zervanite heresy to runecraft to whatnot. But it felt like I was playing hide and seek with the divine. And behind all the different cultural artifacts and practices, there was one force that I kept encountering. You know, when I encountered that force, and you can call it Hercules, you can call it Thor, you can call it Ogmius, you can call it, you know, whatever you want. It had different names in different cultures, but behind the masks, it was the same force. So I moved my home to that. And again, as you're saying, this holy guardian angel, this higher self, it could be something internal, it could be something external. Sometimes I think one, sometimes the other, sometimes a combination of both. Sometimes I think that space-time limits it. So I'm not of one opinion on that, or nor have I been in a very long time, but that's my home. So I'm there, just like the part of you that never changes that we spoke about before the show started, where you realize as you get older that a part of you is unmoved and untouched by what's happened to you in this life, and it hasn't changed. You're the same person essentially at your core that you were when you were a child. So the same thing with that spiritual part of me that's otherworldly. Although I don't understand it with my mind, I don't doubt that it's there. I've experienced it enough times to know that it's there. And through training, I can tap into it all the time. I tend to express my relationship in Greek mythic words because that's how I'm most comfortable with it. That's what first drew me to it. But that's my home. So part of me is always in my home. So that's my thinking. And thank you, Tony, for introducing it. I'm dying to hear what Clio has to say.
Well, it's so funny because Hercules was like, oh yes, you want to say a few things, which I found so much to react to from what um, Tony was saying, and now even more from what you were saying, in part because a lot of this, I think Tony, going back to where you started and talked about how you were raised, and my mine is a little, I don't want to say it's different, because I was raised in a very religious family where going into ministry or being someone who was a missionary was like breathing. It was just kind of like there. The only thing that would have offended my family is if I ended up being atheist, as long as you believed in something. But I was nominally Christian because I couldn't get an answer to some questions. And then I left entirely. But when I left, I was always looking for that connection and that voice, literally the voice that wakes you up in the middle of the night, which until I came to paganism, um, it was sort of like, okay, you happen, it's a kid. And I don't know what the amount of people who have this experience where they hear their names called and they actually go seeking for it. I'm sure there's quite a few, but it's not like you can go and talk to every single person and see, did you have this experience as a child? And because we may or may not remember it, but I think that we are called by the gods and we have connection with the divine if we are open to it all of our lives. It's just where we happen to be when we wake up and find that comfort. And I searched for that comfort through two major religions before I got to where I am now, and then realized, oh, yeah, this is where I need to be. But I never thought that I needed to reject what was in the past. I know a lot of people have been hurt. And so when I think of nostalgia, the first one where it's the pain, what was it? You had home and pain. And I thought, okay, how often are there practices that you find comforting, even though they might be either rooted in pain or the past may be a painful reminder? And then where do you go to find comfort now? And I find, like you, Hercules, comfort in practice and ritual and things that are dealing with the Greek side of stuff now. Um, I I am sympathetic and empathetic to those people who have tried their best to make their peace with their religion, generally but not always monotheistic. And I agree with you that Tony, the idea of being someplace and you have people who you're not alone, but you might as well be alone. You might as well be the person who's there. It's kind of like the people who say, well, yeah, should you stay married or should you get divorced? And the question is, well, is it better to stay in a bad marriage or is it better to be alone? And then you see the people afterwards going, oh, 100% better to be alone because you don't have the baggage of worrying about it. Religiously, I think you got that same thing. If you're looking for the connection with the divine and you're finding it with people who may not necessarily have been who you would associate with, and it means you've got to leave where you were, it's a hard choice and it's a brave choice, but sometimes that nostalgia is always you're trying to find that center within. And I know it took me about 30 years to get to that place where it's okay. And I thought I had it. That's the other part that I don't think either of you mentioned, but it's important. You think you find the nostalgia, you think you find your place, your people, and then sometimes you realize, no, I thought it was there, but it wasn't. It was good, it was great, but that wasn't it. And then you go on to the next thing, and hopefully it doesn't take too many times. Um, Remembering what's happening and being brave enough to admit that. That's the other part of nostalgia that I think when they talk about stuff for Gen Z and Gen Y and I guess Gen Alpha, although they're kind of young, they're looking for something that you can hold on to. And what's interesting is the people I see, it doesn't have to be, oh, nostalgia is a bad thing. I'm actually kind of glad they're looking at it, that they're actually willing to be open instead of you must be in a box in a silo and you must stay in your lane and not go anywhere. I think that's what causes frustration, I think, instead of a true connection. If you are stuck with and think you can't go anywhere else religiously or spiritually, then that's just sad, you know? That kind of desperate loneliness is, yeah, it just, it's something that once you have felt that, you never want to feel that again. And I have felt that in the past at times where I just was not sure why I was someplace, in a religion that it's nice for other people, but it's just not doing it for me. And everyone around you is happy and not understanding why you don't want to be there. And I don't know if either of you has had that experience.
Oh, sure. I know I've had that experience when I was exploring before I found that Olympus was within as well as without, and I could fill my life with as much Olympus as I as I cared uh, to be attuned to my source or my higher self or my heaven or again whatever you want to frame it as. But I felt that like I've always felt one with the universe. So Henosis was
Mhm.
never one of my uh, quests in this life, but I knew what it was like to feel forsaken by the divine, where you seem to be
Mhm.
stuck in an illusion that won't go away, and you're connected to everything, yes, on an energetic and an atomic level. And there's no doubt about that. You can't not be connected to everything, but you don't feel connected to anything. You haven't found your connection, as you were saying. Uh, and that's a difficult road. That's a dark night of the soul, where you're waiting through the night, and waiting for the spiritual sun to rise and or the
Mhm.
moon to rise. If that's where you get your energy from.
I mean,
Tony, oh, sorry.
no, I was just going to add that probably the worst part for me personally has been when you're not sure if you're at the right place, but you're able to help others get to their right place.
Right.
And so then it's like, well, I can help others do this. Why can't it's like I can help someone, why can't I be happy? And then you grumble. And then it's like you're through it and you're like, oh, okay, I just had to take some time. And I like the fact, Tony, that you started with, let me look at my notes here because I wrote this down. Remembering an emotional state now, remembering what was it, heightened spirituality, the dissatisfaction with mainstream religion. Um, I used to have that thing where I was very, very dissatisfied in thinking about it, and I would always run into people who would say, "Oh yes, my life was great until I left mainstream religion," and have nothing but negative things to say about it. I would like to perceive that there are people for whom mainstream religion actually works for the level where they are, like that they're happy, genuinely happy with that. On the other hand, for the people who need something else, I wish there was a enough of a connection and a path that there would be acceptance of people who say, you know what, I don't know what I need, but this is not it. And acceptance of people who need to leave. I think that's the thing that brings me the most sorrow right now for others as they're finding their way through connection to divinity and oneness, that they don't have the rejection of their family or their friends or their community, that they have people who are willing to help them on their way. And I don't, you don't know how many people are out there to help you, but that's the one thing that I think I see as the downside for nostalgia, because there's that longing. And if each of us is Odysseus, then what happens when you don't have someone who is able to help you on your way because you get rejected by, and that's the part that always makes me sad when I run into people who have, that's what they've gone through, and so it makes them very hesitant about accepting what's home when they come in to this side of the fence, so to speak.
Clio, I really liked what you said about not totally abandoning the things that you had in your past, because nothing is ever totally bad. So there are good things within Christianity. There are good people within Christianity. Personally, I really like Jesus. I love the way he loved unconditionally, the way he looked after the poor, he healed the sick, and everything else. And if more Christians were like Jesus, they took up their cross and followed him, then the world probably would be a better place. But there are so many people that have perverted his message. We've got the prosperity gospel in America. We've got people who are incredibly judgy, and yet they themselves aren't living particularly good lives. But there is still a lot that you can learn from Christianity. I still think in Christian terms, like I think in terms of having fellowship with people. Christians talk about having fellowship. So every time I come onto a panel like this or other meetup groups, I feel like I'm having fellowship with like-minded souls, and I recognize how important that is. And that was one of the lessons that I took away from Christianity. Like I said, nothing is ever all bad. So thank you so much for pointing that out.
I try to do that because even though my family background is Christian, for the record, one side was AME, African Methodist Episcopalian, the other side was Baptist, a variety of them, and 12 years of Catholic school. So I was fully indoctrinated. At one point, I thought I'd be a nun, but had a few issues with that. Um, and then I spent almost 20 years in Orthodox Judaism. And that is, I think what happens is people find their tribe, their people they work with, and it's so insular at times. The most, it's like you find a language, you find a people, and then you don't see anything else outside of that group. And I think that's the only downfall that I see for not just monotheistic religions, but any religious or spiritual group or path where the need to accept that there are other paths and other people, and that might not be yours, and that's okay. And sometimes what bothers me is when other people are not willing to feel the same way about what we do, about what each of us does individually. And that's something I've sort of had to come to peace with, even with nostalgia of, okay, there are people who may never accept that there's anyone who believes anything outside of Christianity. And that's a hard that's been a hard thing to accept because, like you said, the idea that there are good things, it's not just one thing or another, but there are a lot of people who don't. And I think that that gets in the way, even with the love of nostalgia, to having a more peaceful, integrated sense of home, sense of spiritual home or religious home, just oneness. Kind of hard to have oneness if you've got all these, but don't forget this. Yeah, that bothers me.
One of the things that I liked in my journey, and one of the things I found was, again, something ancient that existed in the modern times, was theosophy.
Mm,
I,
mhm,
I don't mean only the ancient theosophy that existed with Ammonius Saccas and afterwards, or the modern theosophy that Blavatsky brought, or the more modern theosophy that evolved later on. I enjoy all of them, but the basic premise in theosophy is that the gods, the angels, the saints, or the ascended masters, in their view, who finished the schoolroom of humanity, and they're kind of there to help us move across things, but they work together.
mhm.
So Jesus and Saint Germain and Hercules could all get together and, try to figure out how to help people through a particular period in history and the trials they're going through. So I was like that, and I thought it was like an ideal heaven,
Yeah,
and that's helped me. And also, I mean, people are people. I know I've changed paths very many times for a variety of reasons. And sometimes things I believe very strongly as life experiences came and I thought about things more, um, I changed my mind. So I'm not standing in the same place. I didn't have the difficulty most people have because, again, the Greek background, although Greeks are very Greek Orthodox, they're also proud of their pagan past. So there were things in there where we learned about mythology and history and philosophy. I first learned about theurgy in a Greek parochial school. And there was also in Christianity a heaven for virtuous pagans, because all the ancient pagans, they couldn't be in hell. No, they're Greeks and they came up with all these useful things. So they had a heaven of their own. And when I was growing up, because I was more attracted to mythology, my parents used to say, when I die, I'm going to Olympus instead of going to the Greek Orthodox heaven. But because we're Greeks, they let us visit each other. So that seems to be a good solution. You got to go to your own heaven where you belonged and where you liked, and then you could always visit your family who's in Greek Orthodox heaven. No big deal. No big deal.
See, I wish I had been raised in that as an idea instead of the very stark traditionalist Christian ideal that, okay, if something's going to happen, yet there's the whole fire and brimstone. If you don't do this, hey, hell is awaiting you. But on the other hand, if you sacrifice and do this, heaven is awaiting you and everything is wonderful in heaven, sort of like the ultimate in delayed gratification. Sort of like, as a sales pitch, really good. Do this, do this, do this, and then you'll get this terrific thing, heaven. And it was not specified other than being the most wonderful place you ever wanted to be. And but I think if there had been something when I was a child that said, okay, yeah, these people aren't Christian, but there's okay. They're not going to hell. They're going to have their own separate place. I think I would have been far more open to giving it a longer shot than I did, you know?
The point that you brought up about some people not believing that you could believe something else.
Hmm.
Uh, I remember when we had our store in Pennsylvania, and we used to have it had everything. It had metaphysical things, it had fantasy in it, it had toys and whatever. It was very eclectic type of shop. It was called the Barbarian Bazaar, and then Mount Olympus Marketplace was another business we had. But people used to come in and talk to me, and I have no beef with the Christianity I grew up in or Christians. A lot of my family are Greek Orthodox, and a lot of my friends are born again Christians or Christians of other denominations, but I'm not. And people used to come to the store and talk to me, and some of them were there to save my soul or convert me. So I relied on something I heard in Judeo-Christianity to keep them quiet. And nobody ever, like, after I said this, that was it. Uh, it was, I don't whore after foreign gods. And they'd ask me why I wasn't following the God of the Bible and the Christianity of the Bible. I would tell them I don't whore after foreign gods, and that these are the gods of my fathers. And I know in the Bible it tells you not to whore after foreign gods, and you have
Does.
to respect the gods of your fathers. So that's how I concluded, and they couldn't refute that, or at
No,
least in
that's
the
a
years.
great answer.
It is a great answer, very clever.
I got to remember that the next time I get somebody on my doorstep.
Glad to be of service.
That's okay. I think when you put it that way, well, first, I'm curious. Just looking back, when you would get the people coming to you, I sometimes often wonder if we have people who approach us either individually or just in general, who they're reaching out because we end up being steps on the path that they need for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, did you sort of feel like your stores at the time, both stores were beacons? Sounds like you
Yeah,
attracted a lot of people who were on the path.
people who didn't feel like they belonged, they would come and they would talk. And people don't have to see the world the way I see it or believe in the things that I believe. In fact, when I was younger and I was uh, fooling around with organizational structures, I had a level in the organizational structure where after you got to a certain point, and I believe life is a great initiator. So we wouldn't initiate people like in the levels until something happened in their life that brought them there. So
Hmm.
there was one level where you fought the dragon, where something was wrong with the world, and you had to fix it. And you became a crusader, and that arose naturally in some people, didn't in others. So that was symbolized by the dragon, because the dragon you had to fight the dragon, and in fighting dragons, you sometimes become the dragon, or you realize the dragon is inside of you, and that's the realization. And after the realization, sometimes you can move past it, sometimes you can't, and you need to leave. So part of the completing the dragon initiation was you could leave, go away for a while, come back if you need to come back, or if you want to come back, don't come back if not, so people do need to sometimes leave. And sometimes being alone or being disconnected or the fear of being damned are very strong motivators in keeping people with a group where they're no longer who they are, they're no longer loved or respected for who they are in their own particular path.
Well, you know what, Hercules, that does bring I had a column years ago in the Wild Hunt. It was based on an actual experience when someone had left our group, and I couldn't understand at the time how literally 1 month, next month, everything is wonderful, everything is great. This is all I've ever wanted. This is my home as a pagan, and then suddenly leaving and deciding that, well, I've got to go back to monotheism. It was very, very abrupt. And I think that what you just brought up reminds me that these things will happen. And I've always tried to reconcile within myself when I see it happen, sort of like a why. I'm always curious as to why. But that's what you just talked about with the dragon initiation kind of makes sense. You go through and it's like you may have needed to part ways for whatever reason. And that's something that I don't know, in your various traditions, has that been something that's been emphasized as, when you, not just when you get on the road, but when you have to leave the road?
Yeah, I institutionalized that. But when again, I waited till it came up in the person, because after you realize that I realized it not through doing anything metaphysical or magical or religious, but when I worked in human services and psychiatric rehabilitation and workforce development, I used to and these are some of the structures I built. I built initiatic structures in the vocational programs. So I did it by focusing on coping adaptive skills rather than learning how to make coffee or like the hard skills that most people associated with these programs. So I keep somebody in a place where they'd experienced different types of stress. And then where they had difficulty, I keep them there until they learned how to deal with that type of stress, or they couldn't. And then I'll move them somewhere else with totally different stressors. So there, somebody graduated the program because it was a vocational program, and it was always the same, and it happened in them. But until it happened in them, nothing I said would mean anything. I'll give you an example. The goal is to get them back to work if they can work.
Mm.
So I have them going through all these different steps in a program, and they start off as somebody on a station, then they wind up being like an assistant manager, and then they wind up becoming a manager, and so on and so forth, and handling problems that come up in the program. After I left, they tried to take this out and gave it to staff, and the program didn't function. I had like a 80-something% success rate when 17% was the average nationally. And then it went back to like 10%, 17% after I left, because you have to let people make mistakes. You have to let people screw up and then recover from screwing up and realizing that they can recover. But people who graduate the program, where they come up to me and ask me if I wanted coffee or if I would join them in like a smoke. And back then you could smoke cigarettes in hospitals and things like that. And I used to smoke very heavily when I was younger. So I sit down, we drink coffee or we smoke a cigarette and talk. And they would say, I realized something. I'm working. I'm working and I'm not getting paid. I might as well just go to work. And I would say, congratulations, you just graduated from the program. Because if I told them they could work, they would fight me, they would resist me, and all that type of stuff. But if they realized and they felt that I was keeping them stuck, then that was something I could grant them their freedom, and then they could move on and do what they needed to do. But they knew, without having to believe me or anybody, that they could work now. And that what they were doing in the psychiatric rehabilitation program was real work. And you can get paid for doing real work. And they not only did the stations, but they were an assistant manager, then a manager. So they knew that if they made a mistake, it's no big deal. You can recover from mistakes. The bread didn't come in, and you have your breakfast run coming. You need to be able to make egg sandwiches. Well, what do? You send somebody out to a local bakery or to the supermarket to get the things you need to get, and it needs to hurry because breakfast rush is going to start soon. But they've been through that a number of times, so they knew that if anything goes wrong, it wasn't the end of the world. So that's just a slice of an example, but that's what I mean by the initiations, what happened through life, and then I would just institutionalize or structure their path so that they're clear. And the same thing spiritually too. Once somebody gets to a point where they realize that the thing they're fighting is something very personal to them, like for instance, I had other people who worked in the human services, and I was always curious what drove them to the human services. And often it was something very personal. And if you're in the human services for like a decade or so, you start realizing certain things. You start realizing that the thing you're trying to fix in the world is something, the people you're trying to help are incidental. The person you're actually trying to help, if it's not yourself, is somebody very close to you when you were growing up. So if someone in your life had an alcoholism problem, you want to be an alcoholism counselor, or if someone has had childhood trauma, you want to heal childhood trauma. So you realize that you've been trying to fix this in the outside world when it's actually something that's very close to you. And then you realize, and again, this is very scary to realize and very horrible, but you realize that despite your education, despite your society's giving you a certificate and telling you that you can do this, despite your working in a hospital, you haven't been able to solve the original problem with the original people. So although you might have been very helpful and illuminating and instructional with the people that you're helping, and that's weird too. Like I've met people, I didn't think I did my best. I just, did whatever I needed to do within the therapy. And I'll bump into them when I lived in New York years later, and they would tell me how much I profoundly changed their life. And then there's other people which I used every skill I possessed and every insight I gleaned, and it didn't make any difference. So, I wasn't the wonder therapist or whatever. Just basically, I was there to listen, to guide, and so forth. So, just shedding a little light on some of the things that I said so that they're more clearly communicated.
Yeah. And since this whole thing is about nostalgia, what I find interesting is each part of this conversation has addressed some aspect of what Tony started off with. Uh, the basic definition of home and pain, and then you have remembering an emotional state, and then remembering the heightened spirituality. What I find interesting is that you talk about all three, Hercules, in your work or prior work that really is reflected in initiation and what we go through, which means how much of this is just all one big initiation.
That's a great way of describing it. What do you think, Tony? Is it a never-ending initiation? Even the theosophists who have jolly gods working with jolly ascended masters to help humanity, they too said that initiation never ends. That it's the upward path is continuous.
Initiation occurs. Initiation occurs in everyday life. A lot of people seem to think that they step into a circle, words are spoken, and they become initiated. That's actually the beginning of it, and there are flow-on effects that happen in everyday life. So, your experiences over the next few months after the initiation ceremony are your actual initiation. So, but Hercules, you and I were having a chat before Clio came on, and I had no idea how broad the topic of nostalgia was. I just thought it was a yearning for the past, the 1950s or the Art Deco era or something like that. But there's far, far more to it. So I'm actually really glad that we've had this talk. And it's also amazing how the stuff that you do in everyday life is all initiatic. It sort of ties into the whole nostalgia thing.
Mm-hmm. And actually, since you both mentioned it, my day job in academia is you get to see the things happening with individuals over and over. And sometimes I'll stand there and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I heard this before. Because literally I've heard it before, at least once a year or once a semester, I will have heard something. It's a different person, a different voice, a different face, but the commonalities of experiences and the desires of wanting to achieve a goal, like to get to wholeness in oneself, the need to go through and achieve a goal through a certain course. And they don't call initiation, but it might as well be. So thank you, Tony, for the reminder. If you might or might not have recalled, we had there was one session I wasn't able to make, and one of the lessons I had to learn was actually I made it. It was the night before the elevation ceremonies, and for in our initiatory tradition, the one I practice, it's you get things, and the actual ceremony doesn't take that long, but afterwards it was like all of these things that you think, okay, I've got this sort of handled, which is always the first mistake. Um, and then things sort of just start popping up in life that you're thinking, oh, hadn't thought about that, because you can't grasp everything. You know, even if you're a human computer, you can't factor every single possible permutation that's going to come through that could advance, or as you said, Tony, be the true initiation, because you don't know when it's going to pop up, which is part of the fun or the tragedy or both. Um, and part of the oneness that comes where you're like, and that was in October. And so it has been, it seems like since then I look around, and you know, I wonder sometimes at the entire, the world soul, the world initiatory process for the people and the planet. Um, it's big scale, but I often wonder sometimes, because of so many people going, and this is a part of nostalgia. Do you think, either of you, that the path we're having now with more people breaking free and deciding to seek, that we're in a completely new initiatory cycle as a people and a planet?
Some people, I think, may phrase it that way if their background is in esoterica and initiatic processes. Some people will phrase it differently depending on whatever symbolism they've grown up with, or they've been indoctrinated into, or they feel most tuned to. Tony?
I was just going to say that there seems to have been a sea change in society. When I was a kid, you never questioned the church, you never questioned politicians, you believed everything that you were told. And what's been happening over the next few decades is people are questioning everything. They're realizing that nothing is as it seems, that there are powerful puppet masters behind the scenes, controlling the government, getting things that they want to get, things that will benefit them. So, you know, there was a time when, like, we would look at the US military as the peacekeepers of the world. They were a benevolent organization. Now we realize that they're basically pawns for corporate interests. And every battle that we engage in tends to be over money, resources, and the like. So we're questioning a lot more. And that questioning attitude tends to flow over into everything else in life. So we're not just accepting what mainstream churches tell us. A lot of people are moving away. They want something real. I spoke earlier on about the emptiness that I felt in church, just doing what everyone else is doing. I went along to born again Christian type churches where I experienced an outflowing of the Spirit and everything else. That felt far more real, far more genuine, but it wasn't quite for me. It didn't quite resonate with me. And we're in a situation now where all these texts which were secret have now been made available to the public, and the public is now in a position to choose their own path up to the top of the mountain, something that resonates with them. It was something that wasn't available to our parents and our grandparents. So these are very interesting times. And Clio's life in particular, the way she started off Christian and she went into Orthodox Judaism. So she was clearly a seeker, but now she's found the path that resonates with her. And that's what we all have to do. Go to the all you can eat spiritual buffet, sample a little bit of everything. It's like, oh, I like that one, and run with that. So sorry to be so flippant, but that's pretty well what we have at the moment.
No,
Yeah, yes, it is. And I wish we had more time.
can I get one more comment, brief
Yes,
comment?
of course.
When I was in India, probably the most profound thing I found years ago, my very first trip, there was a truck driver, and he was taking us from Delhi to Dharamsala, and I asked him, we just talk about religion, and he's like, he didn't get it. He was like, they're all gods, and he showed us and pulled past a truck stop, and the best thing was this truck stop had, I don't know, probably at least 50 different types of trucks, small trucks, big trucks. And it's like, yeah, we have all the puja in there for all, whatever your God is, we got something for you. The idea was it was okay to worship whoever or however you were going to worship. And it was an overlap. So you could be Hindu and you could be Christian at the same time, and nobody cared. Whereas the Western aspect is you choose your lane and doggone it, you stay in your lane. You don't, you can't blend. You can't say, oh, I'm this and this, because somebody is going to get upset. Namely, and so I often wonder, because he was just an ordinary truck driver, and I noticed when I talked to my Indian friends, especially my Hindu friends, less of my Tibetan friends, that I would see, yeah, sort of the same thing, the acceptance, the genuine acceptance that people may have belief, they may have interaction with the gods, but it's not just, oh, it must be one set of gods for this one tradition. You can have other traditions, and that's another part of nostalgia. So I just wanted to put that in there for people who are like wondering.
Thank you. Yes, that is a good practice. And I'd like to devote a show to that practice. It's very much like the Theosophist. Doesn't matter which God or which Elohim or which angel, you're working with. You're working with somebody, and they're all working together in some way.
Mhm. I like your idea. I'm gonna keep that. Like, yeah, there's a nice council that's looking over and helping us, as opposed to fighting.
And they get promotions too, and they switch departments, so things don't remain static. Like the story of Athena is she was the lord of karma for a while, and then now in some systems she's doing something else, and then you have the goddess Liberty, and sometimes they work together. So it's a very welcoming mythology. And you don't have to believe it. What you understand is what you can understand at your level of understanding. So that works for me too. Tony, how can people get in contact with you?
Um, I have a Facebook page and also an author Facebook page, although I haven't been using the author page very much. I also have a blog on Patheos called Holistic Spirituality. I haven't written for them in the last few weeks. I've had too many projects on, but I'm going to get back into it. So they're probably the best ways.
And Clio, how can people get in contact with you?
I have a Facebook page that I'm not always on, but I always check my private messages, so just DM me on Facebook. I have my monthly column first Saturday of the month with the Wild Hunt, and that means the next one's coming up at March 1st. And yeah, and you can always, I think there's a place on the Wild Hunt website. You can click and they'll send an email directly to me, and yeah, would love to hear from people.
Awesome. I am no
Oh,
longer
and
Facebook.
I'm at Paganicon in person. That's coming up March, third weekend of March, 20th, 21st, and 22nd of March.
Awesome. Tony, are
Nice.
you up and waiting for any particular events in the near future?
It's 9
Um,
o'clock.
it looks like I'm going to be at Sacred Harvest Festival in Minnesota.
Awesome.
But I've only just started preliminary negotiations with them. They reached out to me a couple of days ago. I've been there twice before and have had an absolutely wonderful time. And so I'm going to see exactly what they're offering. But they're back to the original campground that they had. So it's one of the best things about Sacred Harvest Festival is they cater for all ages. So you've got kids coming, teenagers. They have activities for everyone. And at 10 o'clock, it's lights out, no more drumming or anything else because the kids have to be able to sleep. So it's a nice child-friendly event. To be honest, it's nice to have no more drumming at 10 o'clock, so I can get some shut eye too.
Well, Tony, if you ever are able to come to PaganaCon, which is in Plymouth, Minnesota, suburb of in the Twin Cities, west of Minneapolis, they may have some things at night. Probably one of the best Dionysian rituals start at 10:30 at night, but you are not under obligation because it's a hotel. You can simply check out, go to sleep, and you don't have to be up with, to midnight. But if you wanted to, you could.
Mm.
But I look forward to seeing you. I'm now going to thrilled to check out Sacred Harvest and see
Nice.
the dates
Be
of
great
it.
to meet you in person.
It will be wonderful. I'm hoping it doesn't overlap with a different conference that I'm at that's not pagan related. But yeah. And what about you, Hercules? How can people get in touch with you?
I'm not on Facebook anymore. Facebook asked me to take pictures of my face and head from different angles, and then they wanted me to connect my telephone to
What?
Facebook. Yes. So I said no. So I'm looking for a new home. I've had a presence on LinkedIn before. At one point, like a decade or so ago, I was among the top 10% viewed pages on LinkedIn, although they've changed a bit. And I'm also trying to establish a presence on Mastodon and Blue Sky. So right now I'm
Okay.
without a home for my community, but that is coming. Thank you for asking, and thank you both for being here. I had a wonderful
Hercules,
time.
before you go, how
Sure.
are you going to promote this podcast if you're not on Facebook anymore? Because that was your primary means of promotion.
Yes, it was on the venues that I have that I'm developing, and also on YouTube itself. People can check out the YouTube channel. We have
Okay.
new stuff, and also some of the older stuff. I'm recycling it and representing it. I'm going to be focusing my shows a little bit more narrowly now because of my spinal condition. I'll be, basically thematically tying everything closer together. So I'm in the process of doing that.
And did we actually record this?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, it's been a crazy, crazy, crazy time. So I'm like, we recorded? Okay. Yay.
Yes, we recorded. I wouldn't forget to record it. Okay, thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.
Absolutely.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.